Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I am thankful to have Aria Mustary with me. Aria is the founder and president of the Mai Soli Foundation, a nonprofit that aims to uproot systemic gender inequality through a combination of education, empowerment, and entrepreneurship. Aria, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Of course, thankful to have you on. So take us back to the beginning. Set the scene for us, where you grew up, your family situation, and what you were like as a kid.
Sure. So I grew up in a pretty low income Bangladeshi immigrant household in Brooklyn, New York City. Um, my parents were pretty poor growing up. We were pretty poor growing up. But basically my mom had come into the United States. She had immigrated from Bangladesh with my dad, and she immigrated here as a child bride. So at 16 years old, she was kind of, you know, taking care of me and my sister as basically a child herself. And that made growing up very different, right? Like that made growing up pretty difficult because you'd have to mature a lot quicker than a lot of other kids, because when you have parents who are kind of immigrating here, which is actually the story of a lot of different um immigrant children that are, especially in New York City, where it's kind of a melting pot of a lot of different immigrants coming in. But definitely a very harsh growing up situation, just because we were all kind of starting out. My parents didn't really know English. Um, but my dad wasn't very equipped to work. He had left a lot, and he wasn't really there for us when we were kids. So that kind of forced my mom to be both the father and the mother of the household, right? And as at this point, maybe like a 19 or 20-year-old who's still understanding the ways of life, it was pretty difficult. But she worked her butt off, and she, started to really understand what it's like to be a immigrant in the United States. And not just to be an immigrant, but like also to be a working woman, to be a single mom, and to really take care of us. So that, for me, getting aside from my mom, for me that meant a lot of growing up to do. So I spent most of my life taking care of myself and my sister, because my dad wasn't really around, my mom had to work. So in that scenario, I was, just very much so grew up as a very tough New Yorker. Like anything that would come in my way, I would understand. Did not have the suburb life at all. Understood New York City trains pretty quickly, the subway system, how to interact with homeless people, which is not something that's typical of like
Yeah,
of just like a normal kid
yeah.
who's like growing up in the suburbs or anything, or really at any part of the world. But yeah, so very, very different. And while my mom was just kind of working, and that basically meant that I was surviving on my own. And little things like, I'm from a Bangladeshi household, so I'd come back home and I'd feed my little sister with my own hands, because that's how we kind of like feed ourselves. So there's like, at this point, I'm a child of like 8 or 9-year-old me is having to feed myself, which is not normal for a 9-year-old to do, especially here. But also just like feeding this child, like my little sister, who's 5 years younger than me. And that was my life for a little while. And obviously, like, we had like good times and bad times, but a lot of it was really harsh, a lot of it was really rough growing up. um and a day in the life was basically, my mom was a child bride, right? And my dad, when I was about like 12 or something, he was like, okay, now that she's 12, she's about to be 13, like it's time for her to get married too. And
Jesus. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
and obviously I'm born and raised here, and
That's
I'm
crazy.
like,
Yeah.
and that's, and I say I'm born and raised here specifically because, young girls who are maybe born in, the other parts of the world, that might be something that they're growing up hearing. And as harsh and horrible as that is, that might be something that they know is coming their way already.
That's a
And
cultural norm.
right, it's
Yeah.
a it's a cultural norm, but unfortunately, it is. So, um and so he said this to me, and my mom was like, "What?" And then I was like, "Are you like, is this a joke?" And at this point, I was just, obviously like done with it. Like I'm very, at this point, way too mature for a 12-year-old, very independent. And my mom was like, "Okay, yeah, no, at this point, like you could have done whatever you wanted to me, but like not my daughter. Like you can't like,
Yeah.
like that was kind of like the end." And she got a divorce from him, and we all, you know, at this point, really having nothing, really starting from scratch, really not having any foundation or anything. Like I still had to go to school. My little sister had still had to go to school. My mom had to pick up odd essential jobs to like really get us by. Which meant again a lot of, other independence that, had to be, especially as a first gen minority student. Going to school was really hard. I was never really good with school or grades because so much was going on outside of my life. Outside of school, I mean, in my life. And we made it work though. Like the three of us, we were just like, a power team, my sister and my mom, and we really made it work. And my mom picking up these odd jobs and stuff, she ended up taking back with her business partner the fabric store. So I don't think I mentioned this, but my dad had this small fabric store in Midtown New York. So in this fabric store, he'd kind of go in and out, but basically he made my mom kind of go into that place of work, and that's where she was working. So when I say like, oh, she was a single mom and she kept on going out and she was working every day, that's where she'd go and work. Um, and as she was working there, she picked up a lot of business skills, and she picked up a lot of entrepreneurship skills, and she picked up a lot of these things because she was working there and she was working for free. And then eventually, once she was working these odd jobs and all of these things, she ended up taking back this fabric store that she was basically working in. My dad had basically nothing to do with, even though he owned it. She took it back with her and her business partner. And now, she's working there. She's a serial entrepreneur. She's like, really thriving. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's really amazing that, like, we went through such a hard, and rough life, all of us, but it really came to how much we've learned through our experiences, and how we made the best outcome of it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
little bit about me.
Yeah. No, the strength that you guys have shown is incredible. Just to dissect that. So for context, uh, obviously the a lot of what we're gonna be talking about is child marriage. So at what age did your mom get married?
She was pulled out of school at 15, and she was forced into a marriage at 16.
Okay. And then at what age did she have you?
About 18, I would say.
Okay. And so she's in America, 18, in a relationship she didn't choose, right? And she's got a
Yep.
kid all at 18. So that's a lot. As you were talking about your story, I'm curious, you mentioned like feeding your sister at 9 or whatever. I when did you become aware of the issue of child marriage? Like, did it come later as you've grown? Like, I mean, obviously you're seeing your mom and dad's relationship, but the you know the actual issue of it, when did that hit your horizon?
That's a really great question. I don't think that's a question I've gotten before, but it's a really great question. It hit me my sophomore year of Babson, so my
Oh
sophomore
wow,
year of
okay,
college.
yeah, yeah,
Um, which is when I started Mai Soli as well. My sophomore year of college, I took a sociology class. And in sociology, they put my professor, who was really great, put a lot of terminology into how um, into how society is, because it's sociology. But specifically, she spoke about how sometimes we're born with certain privileges, sometimes we're born with certain luck and chances that we just get just by being born, right? Um, and that really struck with me because at this point, sophomore year of college, like I said, I don't think I've mentioned this, but I was blessed through high school. So in high school, I got a what's called a Posse scholarship by the Posse Foundation, and I got it through leadership. So basically, I was a very strong leader once my dad had gotten divorced. I mean, my once my parents had gotten divorced, I became, I really came out of like my shell, and I really felt free because we were so oppressed. But I felt free, and I started to do a lot of like high school just like leadership activities, like a lot to do with like charity stuff, but in general just like leadership activities. And Posse Foundation saw that, and Posse Foundation, the mission of their foundation is to increase diversity in higher institutions by getting high school leaders who can really catalyze that change within and catalyze that diversity and real change within higher institutions. So we were a New York posse going to Babson College, which was um I believe like 50% or like primarily a pretty white institution, although there is diversity from international places or other countries. And basically, I was blessed to have, to go to such a, great institution, but it was really difficult coming in there from a pretty average or less than average public high school, right? So my GPA was very subpar, very less than average, really terrible, and I was really struggling with a lot of the prerequisites that we had to take in this college. And we're in sociology, when the professor was speaking about, oh, like sometimes your the way your life takes you, you can have more chances to kind of better yourself. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So I was fighting with, or my GPA was fighting with someone who may have gone to the best private school in Singapore and would have had all of these prerequisites or all of these foundations in statistics and all accounting, or a lot of these things that I'm learning for the first time, right? And it's not just at Babson, but a lot of us, like minority students, posse students, etc., we don't come in with that foundation that a lot of other private students come with, right?
Mhm.
And I know I wasn't the only one feeling this, because it struck to all of us in this class. And then I was depressed. And then I was like, wow, what am I doing here? And then I like called my mom and I cried, and I was like, I'm not fit to be here. I'm not meant to be here. Everything is just, it's just way too hard. It's way too difficult. And I just felt like I didn't belong, and I couldn't be there. Um and I had realized that my mom was like, and my mom is a huge proponent on never pressuring me. There's a lot of like South Asian, I guess, like in the diaspora, we're all like, we sometimes have parents that pressure us to do certain things, and my mom was always very against that. My mom's like, if you don't think you could be there, then just come back with me, we'll figure it out. You know what I mean? Like that was very much so her vibe. Like, don't pressure yourself, just figure it out. But at this point, like that's not what I wanted to do, right? Like I wanted it to be fair, I wanted to be more just. I wish that the system was um more suitable for me. I wish that the system actually helped me. And although Posse was one step there, it wasn't completely there, right? And then I connected this with what could have almost happened to me, and in just reflection in the state of depression that I was in. And in reflection, I was thinking that I could have been married at 12, just because of the way that my cards were dealt. I could have been married at 12. My mom was married off at 16. My grandmother was married off at 14, whatever it was. Um, and I was like, the way that the cards are dealt is just wrong. And the way that the cards are dealt isn't just and isn't fair. And it's not, and a big thing that we learned was it's not just like hard work that gets you from place A to B. There's so many systemic injustices, there's so many systemic problems that literally create obstacles to where you want to go. So
What you're saying
just
is if you were born in Bangladesh and were 12 years old, there's a good chance that you would be in a child marriage by now.
I wouldn't have had a chance.
Yeah.
The only difference was that I was in the United States and that I had a mom, like, who was, but even so, I know people in my Desi diaspora that I knew a Pakistani girl that I was growing up with who ended up getting married, who had to go back to Pakistan at maybe 12 or 13 to get married. So being in the United States really doesn't make that much of a difference. It's really the cards that you're dealt, it's the family that you're dealt, it's the luck that you have sometimes. And there's no one fighting for these girls, and there's no organization that's just like on a large tangible scale fighting for these girls. And I was reflecting on this, and I had realized that, like, this, I that I'm still lucky, that I was lucky to have a mom that I was lucky to have the Posse Foundation, that despite my grades being crap, or despite the fact that I didn't go to a great school, they still believed in me, and me and my other 9 Posse teammates, like the people that are in my posse, we were all believed in, we were all given the chance to go to a private institution that wouldn't have looked at us otherwise. Um, so then I'd realized, like, the same thing could be done for these girls around the world who, because they're low income and they're girls, that's it. That's why they wouldn't have a chance. And that's so unfair, and that's so unjust. And that's when I realized that, okay, that's really what gave me hope. That's what pulled me out of my depression, that hope that what the chance that was given to me, I can maybe give that chance to maybe 1, 2, 10, 100 girls, hopefully. But yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it came to your mind your sophomore year of college,
Mhm.
basically for your
Yeah.
sociology class. Um, there was a lot said there, but I think one thing that you're highlighting, which is a really important thing, is that transition from high school to college, coming from a less rigorous uh, high school.
Right.
It, what do you think institutions can do to help that? Right, because there's each year this is happening across universities across the country and the world, and uh, some have the grit and are able to make it, like you have been able to, but some drop out after the first semester, or maybe after sophomore year, and and uh just go back home, and just because they don't feel like, first, that they fit into the population of a college campus from a socioeconomic background and all that, and then also they just they can't keep up, they maybe are pre-med, and that's the hardest major at a university, and then they just decide to leave. Or um is it academic tutoring? Is it what can institutions help to alleviate that problem?
That's a really good question. I would say the first step is the first step is to do more preventative care with these students. So first is to even give them a chance to get them into the place of your institution in a ethical way, so not in a way that's just maybe increasing your diversity quota, or something that you could put in your magazines or catalogs or on your website, that, oh, we have diverse students, right? To genuinely create a place for students, for minority students, where they can feel like, okay, I have a community here. So community, I'd say, would be the first part, to make sure that, if I'm one of the only few Bangladeshis, for example, like, in the entire school. I think I'm maybe one of two child of Bangladeshi immigrants, and not like maybe a Bangladeshi who came from Bangladesh and came very wealthy. So and the rest obviously are like very wealthy, like Indian or Chinese, international students,
Yeah.
which isn't true diversity, in my opinion. In my opinion, true diversity would be, sure, there's the international, not discounting the international students, but taking people who are from the American diaspora, or like people from the United States who came from minority backgrounds or came from really tough backgrounds, and giving them a chance at actually having a future in your institution or having a future past your institution. So that chance isn't honestly like, isn't even just tutoring or anything like that, because there could be tutoring, but there's so much guidance that we need for how to even navigate the college. You know what I mean? Like I l- I had no idea. Like I'm still figuring it out, and I'm in my senior year of college, and I still am not sure, what the process is, because I don't have the network, I don't have the connections, I don't have a lot of these things that maybe like my other peers do at Babson. So that's not bad. It's just like, instead of putting the money into, that institutions have, into things that maybe are more showy, to do something that's actually actionable for those minority students, or for those low income students who are coming into your school that's past scholarships, because that's really what creates the feeling of inferiority. That's what creates the feeling of, I'm not good enough to be here, or because you might not have that community, you might not have the resources, you don't have the navigation. So that's a few ideas for what institutions could probably do.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you, kind of just to make it real for, for people that are coming from middle class or upper class backgrounds, where do you think you would be if it wasn't for the Posse Foundation?
That's a really good question. I had gotten a scholarship the same time to Baruch College. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So at Baruch College, there's something called a Macaulay Honors. And I think I would have probably gone there, because I couldn't have afforded college at
Yeah.
all. So I think something that would have been, obviously cheaper, because I was in New York City, I would be staying in my apartment, so that would get rid of dorm costs, obviously meal costs too. And it was a pretty good institution. I knew I wanted to be in business. Obviously, I'm very blessed to have gone to Babson, and I really, if I had to make the decision over, I'd probably choose Babson over and over again. But if Posse didn't exist as a foundation, then I think I would have gone to Baruch.
Yeah. Which means you wouldn't have gone to Babson, and
Yeah,
that's important to highlight.
right.
Um so I guess, you know, I guess you're more aware of the term of child marriage as, in your sophomore year of college, and I think that, right, a lot of us are aware of a lot of problems in the world,
Mhm.
and but we don't do anything about it, right? And so what was the process of, now you realize there's a problem here? And maybe let's also talk, I mean, cuz I think we didn't get into it a lot, but can you, at least for the people that aren't aware of the issue, can you talk about how systemic child marriage is first?
Sure. So systemic child marriage occurs for a few different reasons. Culture is a big reason. Financial reasons or poverty is also a big reason. Tradition. And that's just a few off the top of my head, but there insecurity. There's a couple different reasons for why systemic child marriage exists. A lot of newer research that we find is that systemic child marriages exist because of low income people, or people that are suffering through poverty. And that's something that we find is a lot more solvable than something that's cultural or something that's more maybe tradition based, or something like that. Like poverty is a lot more solvable because that means that the value to young girls, it isn't completely hidden, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so like for example, like I have here that UNICEF says 1 in 5 women in the world um are married before the age of 18, and that can often lead to domestic violence, teenage
Yep.
pregnancy, dropping out of school. Um, and then also, especially in Bangladesh, I think there's with the if you grow up in a poor family and if you're able to marry your daughter off to someone who's a little bit more well off,
Yep.
then it helps you out financially. So those are some of the reasons families continue to do child marriages.
Exactly. And the stat actually is that 1 in 3 girls, I believe, is forced into marriage before the age of 18, right?
Yeah.
So that means that's 1 girl every 3 seconds is forced in to child marriage, and or a young girl is being married. So it's the problem, like you said, is has a lot to do, especially in Bangladesh, to poverty, and because sometimes it is because they see their young girls as burdens, and because my son is going to be able to maybe take on my family business, or he's going to get married to a young girl, and she's going to make a baby, and they're both going to work in the household, and they're going to do household chores, and my son is going to be the one who's actually working because the girl can't work, right? So a lot of what we found, at this point when I was doing research trips to Bangladesh to really understand the problem, I was talking to parents and religious leaders and families and everyone. I really wanted to understand this my sophomore year of college. So it's funnily enough, while everyone was kind of like going to Mexico or the Dominican Republic or
Yeah.
Spain during spring break, I had gone to Bangladesh. I don't know if you had already spoken about this, but it was the toughest time of my life because we only had 5 days. 2 days were, 2 days were just in the plane. Oh,
Yeah.
it's 7
Yeah.
days, and
Yeah.
2 days are just, like, in the plane because it's 24 hours,
Yep.
and I had gone there just to do these research trips and lived in, like, harsh, very harsh conditions, but I really wanted to know. I really wanted to know what the actual problem was. I wanted to go on the ground and do the research myself and not just rely on other people's research, because this is the place in the country that I wanted to be working in. And I had gone there, and like I said, I was talking to families and religious leaders, and they were like, and I was like, okay, why are the young girls getting married? And they had said, we don't want them to get married. And I had said, why are they being forced out of school at such a young age? And they had said, no, I don't want that. We don't want them to be, why would we be sending them to school just to take them out? They just don't have job opportunities after. They don't have anything to do after. So that kind of made me realize, I was like, okay, so this problem is actually solvable, because it's true. Why would they be sending so many of their girls to school to learn, to not just learn, but to like make them study, to force them to learn, all of these pressures on it. If they didn't actually care about their daughter being valued. So that being said, yes, of course, this is rooted in sociocultural norms. Of course, this is rooted in cultural norms and past, gender inequality just being so deeply rooted into the society. But when, and this is a huge thing that Babson teaches us, when there's a problem, there's an opportunity, right? So, and in this problem, there's an opportunity to solve something that is so clearly financial. They're saying that, yeah, of course I value my daughter, but I we just don't have the money to keep her. Getting her married off is easier because we can secure her future. So that's a little bit about the problem and what I had found in Bangladesh.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I was getting ready to ask what made you then start, because as I said, a lot of us see a lot of problems, but starting a nonprofit is a whole different level of commitment.
Right. It was definitely the entrepreneurial energy that I was around at Babson. That's why I feel very lucky and to have blessed to be going at Babson because there's so many resources for someone who's trying to start up a business or do any startup of any kind. Nonprofit, I think I'm definitely one of the very, very few. There aren't that many nonprofits. I think usually it's a for-profit business or a product or a service that someone kind of wants or tries to sell. And I was also advised because it is brutal. It is tough being a nonprofit, and I was advised to really consider a B Corp or a for-profit system to me, wanting to solve the problem of child marriages, which is a pretty big problem to tackle. This is a problem that's existed for centuries, and no one's really ever tried to be like, okay, we're going to solve this problem in a way where it doesn't happen again, right?
Yeah.
Um, so uh, Babson really did help with that. There was a lot of entrepreneurial resources. There's legal advisors. There are people who are specifically for early stage, specifically for the launch and growth stage, and just growth. So I had just starting off, I was talking to a lot of the professors. I was talking to a lot of different advisors and people about, okay, how do I start to solve this problem? How do I start to even think about this problem because I know I want to solve this. I know I have resources there. I know I have family there. How do I start? And they had given me advice. They were like, okay, do this research trip, do this, to try to understand where the families are coming from, try to understand how you can actually solve this problem. But you're gonna need to test it. You're gonna need to see how it works. So nonprofits are very similar to for-profits in that way. But to your question, how I got started, very I was very against making it a for-profit when I had decided it because a lot of for-profit systems make money off of, maybe the girls creating something. So sometimes in these systems, like sex trafficking organizations, for example, you might be like, and that definitely might work for that model, but it might be like, okay, you make like necklaces or clothes or something to what's it called, to get them to self-sustain themselves or get them to financially be okay for themselves. So that's a lot of the advice that I got, like, oh, why don't you get them to, make clothes so you can have like a global fashion brand, and that money would then fuel, their program, and it would just be the cycle. But my main caveat with that was what we say is that we give the young girls a choice. So the choice can't be make necklaces or clothes for us or child marriage. To me, that's not the mission, and to me that seems very unethical. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want it to be like, okay, so your options are either you do what your mom says or you do what the foundation says.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
not, you know what I mean? So the point of what we do is really we give them a choice. We give them their options. You can either, if you do want to get married, then that you've learned through our curriculum all of your choices, and you can choose, okay, now I do want to get married. That's your choice at that point. You know what I mean? At this point they would have been at the age of consent, et cetera, et cetera. If they wanted to continue their education, then we would have given them the resources for that. So, I mean, that's getting a little bit ahead, but that's why I think I had chosen the really difficult nonprofit model because it stays with the mission a lot closer than a for-profit model.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess you talked about it a little bit, but how soon did you start, things like the mentorship training program, and maybe, I guess, maybe talk about what the foundation does today for, people that don't know.
Sure. So the foundation is basically comprised of three main components. So the first component is our curriculum. So our curriculum includes, I think we had said this before, but entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and leadership and confidence. So what does that mean? So entrepreneurship is, what we know of it as entrepreneurship, but also a little bit different. So entrepreneurship wouldn't be like Mark Zuckerberg or, rocket, like not rocket pitches, yes, but not like a PowerPoint presentation by any means, or a really in-depth pro forma, nothing like that. Like entrepreneurship for what it means in their context, in a developing country context, in their villages context. So that could mean, we have these specific, I guess, activities where like they take a water bottle and they innovate ideas on what to do with that water bottle. So like very holistic kind of activities. It's not just kind of like a sit down and learn education. It's very hands on. It's very like they're kind of leading their learning as much as the person teaching them is leading their learning. So that's a little bit about entrepreneurship. They learn how to sell once they do develop their idea. Another thing that we do is financial literacy. So that's the very basics that we kind of grow up learning, like accounting or saving or, budgeting, just like or how to open up your first bank account, things that young girls would never be able to learn in this, environment ever. And last is leadership and confidence. So that's really understanding how to like how to really challenge authority, how to be a leader in your community. And we also discuss really important topics like colorism. Um, so I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but like in the South Asian community, especially in the diaspora, we're always told that, being light skin is better and being,
Yeah.
fairer is better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's really problematic because you go to Bangladesh and you go to India or Nepal and all of the countries around this, and they don't look like that, right? Like they don't. We're all like pretty dark skinned. Yes, there are fair skinned people, but we're all pretty dark skinned, and that's not healthy to look at yourself and think that I'm not beautiful because I'm not fair, I'm not
Yeah.
thinner, I'm not this, I'm not that. And that's a really big part of being a leader, to really have that confidence. So we have that in our curriculum too. And we talk about colonization and how it came from all of that. But what really solidifies this is what you were talking about, which is our mentorship program. So what we did was we took 20, this is on a very grassroots level. So we took 20 young women who go to a really prestigious university. So one of the best universities in Asia. They happen to be in Chittagong, Bangladesh, which is where we work. And those young women, they were vetted by us. So they went through this really hard application process by, my co-founder and I, and they were chosen to be a part of the mentorship program. So they were taught how to be good mentors, they were taught how to listen, they were taught we were all talking about, what young women go through together. But even bigger than that, they serve as real near peer role models for what these young girls could be, because
Yeah.
they're in college, they're starting their careers, they're at this point where they've, started something, and they serve as an insane inspiration for these young girls. And that's why, like, our program is like, it's very different, it's very holistic, because those same mentors, it's not teachers teaching them, it's the mentors that we've trained and vetted to teach them our curriculum. But yeah.
How has it have you iterated through a lot of this, or was it just from your research you kind of knew that this would work, or like how's it been?
It's been pretty good. I
Okay.
I did do a lot of research before I had got in, but I think Posse, like, I think the angel that stands behind me is like very much so the foundation of how I think about this program is how Posse affected me, right? So I also have my Posse mentor who's literally, like I said, like an angel, just like all has always been with me, and has really provided me the guidance to navigate through Babson. But that's kind of where I thought of the mentor to mentee relationship, the way my mentor is to me, which and I'm the mentee, and how what a huge difference that makes, because a teacher or a professor is a different authoritative level where you can't really speak to them about issues that you're facing, very real life issues that you're facing, guidance that you need. So the mentor serves as that. And I felt like this is something that works really well with a nonprofit that I'm a part of, a foundation that I'm a part of. And it's a really great thing that if the girls would have it, that would go a long way for them.
Yeah. I'm curious, how was when you were starting and even now, how has your mom reacted to this and you starting this?
She's really happy. She's every time I'm feeling down, she's like, or I'm feeling really stressed or overwhelmed, she's like, just remember you're doing it for the girls. Like remember that you're doing it for your cousins who are like from my dad's side of the family because they're a lot more conservative. They're like a lot of them are getting married, and they're getting married I think straight out of school, so maybe not necessarily child marriage, but they're still 18 and they're still
Yeah.
really young, and they're
Yeah.
still they're not understanding how to navigate life, and now they have to do domestic duties after going to school for all these years. um and that's their future, and that's something that I can't help anymore, that I can't affect anymore, but I can maybe affect like the new generation and maybe make a dent in their lives. So she's really really happy.
Yeah. That's awesome. I have a couple friends in nonprofits, and one of the things that they always have to show, especially for fundraising purposes, is success, right? So for maybe the Debbie Downers, and hopefully there aren't any, but for those people out there that are saying, looking at your organization and going, how do you measure success? What do you have to say to that?
Sure. So the way that we measure success is the girls that are staying in school because of us and the ones that aren't. So the My Soli girls that we're with, they're the percentage in which they would be in school versus the My Soli girls that aren't with us and the ones that wouldn't be in school. But the way that we measure success, that's not in a very standard, we're going to a grant, I guess, pitch kind of form, is that, like I said before, we're giving them a choice, right? And we're measuring success by the fact that we're, again, the only organization to have, like, given the resources to literally teach families and teach parents in this process through what we call a family orientation, about our program. So we teach them, and or we have a regional director, whose name is Nipa, and she's just insane. Like she's incredible because she will literally, she's a woman, so a woman leader in Bangladesh who's, there's very few, just because of like the systemic things that happen there. One of the very few women leaders that is, we're very lucky to have her as our regional director. And she had made sure in this family orientation that not a single dad, not a single mom, not a single grandparent had left this orientation without them knowing what My Soli is doing. Because when we had started the program, like anything, because this is the problem, um, at the start of 2020. So our program actually didn't finish all the way through because of COVID. But in the couple months that we existed, in like the 2.5 months that we existed, when I was talking to the mentors, they had told me, they were like, okay, I'm having one-on-ones with my mentors, and they're saying that our one of my mentees is going to get married, or is going to get forced to get married at like 14 or 15 years old.
Yeah.
And this happened, and I was like, okay, maybe it's just the one mentor, and that happened with two or three or four mentors. And then we were like, okay, we thought the families understood, clearly they don't. And I had called Nipa, and she had put on this whole family orientation, and that brings me back to every single parent, every single person there, they now know, and they had brought all of their questions, they had brought all of their maybe things that they didn't think would work, maybe they didn't fully see the value in their daughters. We were really telling them that we weren't letting go of these girls' hands, because what is my Soli means never alone, right? So we were telling them that if My Soli means never alone, that's the mission. The mission is that we make sure that the girls that we are helping are truly never alone.
Yeah. And um I guess, as you've been running this for, close to 2 years, what's there's so many aspects of this, right? What's the hard, like, especially you're in the US, they're in Bangladesh. There's been COVID. There's creating a curriculum. Well, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. What do you think? For anybody that might, you know, is hearing this and might think about starting their own nonprofit. Maybe it's in Pakistan or some other country. What's been the hardest challenge?
Um, I would say the hardest challenge is getting people to believe in this in a very different way, and not in a way where people don't believe that the problem isn't happening, but getting people to believe in the fact that, okay, this is something that could. I guess I'm thinking, if we're talking about nonprofits, I'm thinking in a very fundraising aspect of it, because the way that the system is set up, it's really difficult for nonprofits to get the same type of funding that for-profits get, right? Especially during a pandemic, especially during anything. So, and that's why my advisors at Babson, they were warning me, and they were like, listen, nonprofits are really difficult. If you're gonna embark on this journey, it's gonna be really difficult in terms of funding. So when I say getting people to believe in this, I don't mean believing in the solution or believing in the idea or anything like that. People believe in that all fine. The problem is getting the funding to really make this work, right? There's a lot of maybe corporations, they won't fund a project that's international because they're focusing on giving back to a community that's close enough to them, because that community will then eventually fund their banks or their businesses or this and
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? So it's like when corporations do decide to give back, it somehow again gives back to them, which is a really bad system, because corporations obviously make a lot of money, and nonprofits finding funding is really brutal and really difficult, which is why we're even considering maybe, because we don't want to go away from our mission, right? So we're thinking about now other business models. We're thinking about other, if we should in fact turn into a B Corp, maybe not a for profit, but maybe a B Corp. Um, so, a lot of, uh, I would say for anyone embarking on the nonprofit or social venture journey, it's a lot harder than a for profit journey in very different ways.
Yeah. And on the flip side, what's been the most rewarding part of this journey?
I would say seeing the girls' faces. Um, I can't explain it, but I think remembering, and my co-founder felt this too when we had my co-founder, who is an American Jewish male. He had gone, and obviously a very huge cultural difference from what he grew up in. He's from Baltimore, Maryland. And he had gone to Bangladesh with me to, deliver the mentor orientation and the pilot program with me in Bangladesh at the start of 2020. And we were talking about it for ages, just the girls' faces, like their excitement with the program, and hearing their ambitions and hearing how Mai Soli is giving them hope. That's an insane feeling. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just on a grassroots level. It wasn't like, sometimes when people are doing good, it's a lot about the social media response or like marketing and things like that. And you get children to say something for your own marketing scheme, which is unfortunately a lot of what I see.
Yeah.
And this is not something that I don't think we'd ever even like take a video of them and like be like, oh, like like nothing would ever be staged, if that makes sense, you know what I mean? Like everything that they've said was so true and so from their hearts, and think like just their eyes when it like glistens with hope, like that's a
Yeah.
very real thing. Like these young girls, like the life as they know it is just like they're already so depressed because they know that they have to get married, you know what I mean? And that even slither of hope that, now they're in this program and now there's a real change that's happening. It's so exciting.
Yeah. You're changing their lives. Um, I, you know, obviously you're a female founder. Has that been has that been a tough experience at all in terms of whether it's fundraising or whether it was, getting the word out? Has that been, I mean, and especially in Bangladesh, um, which, I think for the US listeners, like, you know, in a lot of developing countries, it's, the leaders are all male, male, right? And so you don't see female leadership at all whatsoever. How has that been?
So it's very interesting that you said that because in Bangladesh I had a lot of an easier experience
Okay.
than the
That's good.
United States, which was very surprising.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of because in the United in Bangladesh I come and I see this. I come with privilege. I come with oh, she's American. She's being American period is a privilege when you go to Bangladesh. But so I come with a lot of privilege, and because of that privilege I'm treated with respect. Although there is like certain things where like, oh, but I'm young, so there's different things. So like being a female founder isn't as rough as like me being young, you know what I mean? Like me
Yeah.
being a young female founder, I think that makes a little bit more of a difference. So sometimes I'd get things like, oh, like she doesn't know what she's talking about because she's young, but that's Bangladesh. In the United States I've had me a possibly worse experience because with when it comes to fundraising or going in front of people or like pitching and things like that, my co-founder very rarely gets any, even though we're saying the same thing, gets very rarely, because he's a white male, um gets rarely any of the same critique that I get.
Yeah.
So we got when we're pitching together, we get, oh, you're naive, you don't understand the solution, or like you don't understand the problem. Like naive is a word that angers me to no extent, because it's obviously like when he pitches, or when a white male pitches into these pitch competitions, are seen as revolutionary, or they're seen as these like very positive, optimistic, futuristic words.
Yeah.
But when it's a woman of color, which is so much worse, when it's a woman of color in the United States, they're like, and this is something that we talk about in a lot of women-based accelerators. So the Win Lab, which is a part of Babson, and this is something that we talk about. There's a bias in the room for women. So the language, and this is studied and shown in research, the language for women is more preventative, is more risky. Are you sure you know the problem? Are you sure you understand this? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's,
that's and I faced this
yeah.
firsthand in these pitches, in these boardrooms. But yeah.
Yeah. How have you managed this while also being a student?
That's a really good question. It's been difficult, but I've managed my time. I believe pretty well. I've managed my time pretty well. I don't socialize as much, but I do, because on top of this, it's not just our startup team. We're still a startup, but we've onboarded about 7 new employees. So I think managing the employees, I think that probably takes up the most time for my Soli currently. I think it's going to take up a lot more time when we're eventually going to have to manage, when the program starts up again, the mentors and the employees and just everyone. I think that's going to be a separate chapter of having to manage it. But for now, when classes are during the day and the meetings with the employees are during the night, and then I have to speak to my co-founder and co-founders actually about just strategy and just how do we keep on going, how do we what should we do next. um I think for now it's a lot of it had to do with time management, and maybe just cutting out socialization a little bit more.
Yeah. What's if you could have a perfect future, what would the perfect scenario be for my Soli?
The perfect scenario is that this problem wouldn't exist anymore
Yeah.
anywhere, right? And you wouldn't need my Soli anymore. I think that's the best way that I could say it. But even more than that, in a way, in a world where my Soli exists, I would love to see the young girls in an ecosystem where they can always rely on each other. so the young girls were like, it's a world that's truly run by girls who are empowered, and that we have taught both men and women in this area, not just in Bangladesh, but we're planning to expand to a couple of different countries for now, and hopefully, become a truly global organization. But for example, with Bangladesh, for there to be an ecosystem of young girls where they're always helping each other, that they have the choices, that they have the resources with each other, with us, with NEPA, and with universities and institutions, that they're able to tackle on any problem that comes to them, and truly that the resources that we give them brings them to a better future and brings their kids to a better future. So we really, when we say we break the cycle of child marriages, we want to say like we break that cycle where the girl gets married, she gets pregnant, she has a daughter, the daughter gets married, becomes pregnant. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
truly
yeah,
break that cycle. So hopefully, that when that cycle is broken, that they don't get into a worse problem, that they have the resources, that they stay in school if they want to stay in school, that they just have the choices to do what they want to do.
yeah. That would be an awesome world. Um, for people out there listening, what can they do to help My Soli?
That's a really great question. So definitely just the lowest thing, of course, that you could do is just follow us on all of our pages. So Twitter, we have Twitter, which is at My Soli Fund. I mean, I'm sure you could maybe put this in the caption
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
something
Uh,
for it to be easier. But our Instagram's at My Soli Foundation, and just following us, even if it's just on Instagram, to stay updated with everything if you can. The second tier of things would be if you guys are able to donate to our organization or any specific campaigns that we have. We're about to have a holiday campaign and a Giving Tuesday campaign, so to stay in tune with that. um, and even more than that, if you work for a company or a corporation, sometimes companies are really excited about this idea, and sometimes they want to match your donation. So even talking to them about that, and that would make a huge difference for us.
yeah. No, that's awesome.
But even more than that, just spreading the word.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Arya, we covered a good amount. Was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think the last thing that I would want people to leave with is, if they are thinking about creating a real change in their communities, to lead with empathy, and to lead with really understanding the problem, understanding what other people's situations come from, and to really, you know, be holistic in their solutions.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Well, Arya, I just want to acknowledge you. Your story is quite incredible. Uh, just where your mom's situation, your independence as a young child, uh, and seeing a problem and then acting on that, and trying to create positive change, and seeing that you already have created positive change, and hopefully this is just the start of where you're headed. So just want to thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
Awesome. Thank you.